Cannibalism is a Red Flag and Other Dating Myths by Colby Newton. When you think of a romantic story, what is the first thing that comes into your head? Some cheesy chick flick where the girl who no one ever noticed becomes prom queen and finally the quarterback falls in love with her? Or a tale set in the past about two lovers torn apart by a war or an iceberg? Please. If you want to know what real love is, try loving someone during the apocalypse. I'm hoping whoever is reading this is sitting comfortably on the other side of this cluster of an era for humanity. As for me, I'm right smack in the middle of the time between the end of the old world and the comfort of the future. But you know what? I'm not the type of guy to let that get me down. Which brings me back to my initial question. What do you think makes a romantic story? Well, I'll tell you. This is a tale of how one man found the woman of his dreams in a world with mutant dogs, rebel cities, and fast food workers who look basically the exact same as they did before the bombs fell. Before I begin, it's probably best if I give you some context on what the dating world is like in a nuclear wasteland. First, there are no longer any dating apps, so just meeting a girl is nearly impossible, let alone finding out if she's interested in you. However, I've devised a system for that. If you meet a girl, and she doesn't immediately try to kill you, then that basically counts as swiping right. That theory has yet to work out for me, but I still think it holds some promise. Next, the dating pool is filled with a few more hazards than it used to be back in the good old days. In my 20s, all you had to worry about was a woman trying to steal your kidney or asking what we are on the first date. Now it seems like they're all either in a death cult worshipping the blast craters, or the radiation has grown a tumor on their brainstems, which causes them to randomly rage out in a primordial reptilian fashion, destroying the cans of Spam that you had been saving for something important, like your future wedding, but now that's never going to happen, Tiffany. Oh, and the kidney stealing thing is still a problem. Not everything changes, I suppose. Dating in your 30s, am I right? Now that you're up to speed on the dating situation, let's move on to the good stuff. The story begins during the relationship I had right before I met the love of my life. I had met TB in the partially standing remains of a parking garage where a food truck had been abandoned. TB didn't shoot me on sight, read, swiped right, so I figured we were pretty much dating. We raided the food truck together, and I felt this instant connection. We didn't even need words to communicate, and worked in silence. Later, I'd find out that was because her vocal cords had been melted by the falling debris of the blasts. But I still think part of it was a deep spiritual connection. Who knew radioactive dust could make for the perfect how we met moment? At first I thought TB was my soulmate. What wasn't to love? She was tall, really strong, had broad shoulders, knew how to fix cars, and respected my personal space. Oh, and she also had two very large breasts. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a pig. I can see a woman for who she is beyond her physical appearance. But after wandering the wasteland by myself for a while, it was difficult not to notice them. However, I am a gentleman, and I knew that loving someone means respecting them. I never once made a lewd comment or suggestive remark. I helped TB, and we hit it off really well. Not being able to talk to someone can be difficult at times, though. Sometimes I would get mixed signals from her, like when I tried to hug her and she'd make a giant X motion with her arms. I thought this meant that she wanted a hug, like X's and O's, so I tried to hug her even more, and then she would just get mad at me. I decided that I needed to do something special for her, and I had just the idea. Every couple needs a romantic evening with good food and tantalizing clothing. I had a pair of jeans that I'd cut into short shorts for myself, and I'd found an old bra in the trunk of a wrecked car, and I knew that TB would love it. Along with that, it was time to show her my true passion. Before the small bane, I had been a culinary student. My dream was to become a master chef, and to pay for my schooling, I worked as a substitute teacher and mostly covered for home economics classes. The souffle of my dreams fell when I was just about to graduate when the world ended. Now, however, those skills were maybe even more important. Making sewer rat edible was its own form of magic, and I was just the magician for the job. So I got dressed in my short shorts, placed the sautéed rat on a hubcap, complete with a garnish of a plastic plant from a fish tank, and found TB quietly at work. I proudly held the bra and the rat out in front of me. I smiled at her, and she stood up and pointed at the bra acquisitively. I held it out to her, motioning towards her chest, again with a smile. I don't really remember much after that, because TB punched me right in the face, and I woke up on the ground sometime later. When I sat up, TB was unbuttoning her shirt. Talk about mixed signals. Now, this is the part where I should probably mention that I didn't always call her TB. Before then, I didn't really have a name for her. When you're the only two people around, you don't really have a need for names, especially when one of you doesn't talk. Just to get ahead of any assumptions, I didn't call her TB because she had tuberculosis. She did, but that's not the point. When she finished unbuttoning her shirt, she pulled it off and dropped it to the ground. What she revealed, with a frustrated wave of her arms, was that TB was, in fact, a man, with 2 large radiation-borne tumors on his chest. Upon reflection, it suddenly made sense why he, would always pee standing up, and trimmed his beard with a knife. So it turns out tumor breasts, or TB, and I weren't meant to be together. Every time I would try to follow him after that, he would throw rocks at me, like I was a dog his father said he couldn't keep anymore. Breakups are never easy. It was then that we went our separate ways, because I couldn't spend the rest of my life with a person who lied to me, and also had a good throwing arm. For a while, I wandered the wasteland alone, but it was in this post-TB world that I began to find signs of my true love. There was a glimmer of hope for this old romantic soul after all. The first sign came when I was rooting around the rubble, looking for spam to restart my collection. I found a little alcove of rubble that had a table in the center of the opening. Someone had eaten a meal at the table, complete with a checkered tablecloth and candles. From the looks of it, they'd eaten some sort of meat on a plate. And this time, just using a plate was considered classy, but a tablecloth and candles too? Whoever had done this had put some serious work into the meal, and I could feel my pulse quickening at the thought of meeting another culinary enthusiast. What I needed to do was make sure this wasn't the greasers. No, not those greasers. These ones were a group of psychotic fast food workers who staffed the local burger joint downtown, both before and after the bombs. The building for the burger place survived the blasts incredibly well, as did the burgers, which hadn't seemed to age a day. The greasers continued working, still in their crusty uniforms, and waited for customers to arrive. They were pretty deep in their delusion, and were typically harmless, but they could be dangerous if provoked. Just like the fast food workers of the before times, these folks were not afraid to lay down the law, or leave tabletops looking like a saltine crackers version of the invasion of Normandy. I followed the smell of high cholesterol until I realized the burger place was just over the next hill of rubble. I slowly climbed up it and peered over the crest. What spread before me was a scene of carnage. Apparently, the greasers had used up their supply of eternal burgers, and had turned to other sources of meat. I won't get into the gory details, but the next batch of patties were going to be made from patties. Honestly, cannibals are the worst thing about the nuclear wasteland, and I would never, ever, ever associate with or entertain anything related to cannibalism. Sure, there were stretches between fresh dog meat when I thought TB's fingers looked like mozzarella sticks, but did I bite them? Yes. But did I eat them? Of course not. I have high standards for my food, and all these creeps were interested in was recreating the combo meals they served before, which meant they hadn't been involved with that meal. I decided it was time for me to leave, so I slid back down the rubble pile. When I made it back to the rubble alcove, only the bare table was left. I was starting to worry that I had missed my chance when I was hit in the back of the head, and my face found the gravel. When I awoke, I was tied up, and it was dark out. I could feel a fire behind me, so I rolled over to get a view of my current predicament. There, standing by the fire, was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. The real no-makeup challenge was nuclear holocaust, so this was my honest opinion of her natural beauty. She also had the checkered tablecloth tied around her waist like an apron, so I knew she was the same person who had prepared the meal earlier. In fact, she was even cooking as I watched her. Cooking a person. You know about deal breakers in relationships. In that moment, I was trying to decide if cannibalism was a deal breaker. I mean, I had dated a girl in college who was a vegan. I know what you're thinking. I had just said that I would never, ever, ever have anything to do with cannibals. But this is bigger than that. This is about the potential for love. Have you ever tried lizard with sauce made from the glowing moss that grows around the craters? I asked her. When you're able to feel your face again, it has a nice aftertaste like coconut. She jumped when I first spoke, but smiled slightly. Sounds like you're going to get cancer, she said. There goes my plan to retire to Florida, I said, and she smiled again. Things were going pretty well, considering a cannibal had me tied up next to a fire. Maybe I could convince her to let me go, and we could talk some more. I was just about to offer my culinary expertise when I saw a movement in the shadows. I glanced over, only to see TB crouching just out of view of the girl. He motioned toward me, and then rubbed one of his pointer fingers quickly against the other one, before pointing at me again. I knew what that meant. I furiously shook my head and then mouthed, "You need to let me go. We broke up weeks ago." Ugh, exes. TB looked at me like I was an idiot and pulled a knife from his pants, making another cutting motion. Oh, I said slowly. What? The girl asked. I rolled back towards her. I was just going to offer my cooking experience. I was a culinary student before, and subbed for a lot of home economics classes, I said. She raised her eyebrows. A chef, huh? What makes you want to help me? I'm the one who knocked you out and tied you up. I thought for a moment before I answered. Loneliness, I guess. I think in the old days you had to find love, and that's the way I had been living my life. Now I'm thinking that maybe you're not supposed to find love, but grow love. Honestly, the cannibalism thing is kind of an issue for me, but nobody is perfect. After all, I tend to snore. So maybe instead of trying to find a love that's perfect, I need to grow one from a seed. I had even impressed myself with that little speech. It looks like the end of the world taught me some lessons about love, like going through high school again, but with better food. I had forgotten about TB until I felt the jerk on the ropes around my back. He was working on cutting me free, laying on the ground so he could stay out of the light from the fire. The moment the rope snapped, I stood up and carefully held out my hands so she could see I wasn't armed. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. TB was standing next to me with the knife outstretched, so I slapped it out of his hand. He gave me an exasperated look before shaking his head and walking off into the dark. Apparently, he had decided to move on after all. Good for him. The woman looked at me cautiously, so I gently moved towards the fire and took a seat. She eyed me carefully before sitting on the other side of the fire. "I don't know you, but I could. Will you let me try?" I asked. It was true that I had no idea who she was, but I felt like this could become something. I wasn't trying to find love, I was trying to grow it. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay, but if you try anything, you'll be the next meal," she said, with an almost undetectable smile. "I understand," I said. "There's just one thing I need to tell you." "What's that?" she asked. "That's not how you sear meat."